I spent over 50 hours learning farming in Manor Lords, running tests, collecting data, and coming up with practical applications for you to use in your campaign. As always, use the timestamps to skip around, and links to both databases from this video are in the description for all to use for free. Now, there are two types of farming methods we can use. We can either manually do it or we can automate it. When we're doing manual farming, it basically means we're going to be selecting the crops that we want as we need it, switching it back to fallow by ourselves. We'll be forcing early harvests, and we'll also be micromanaging when workers are going to be in the farmhouse to make sure that they don't harvest stuff that's not quite yet ready. If we leave the AI to do it, they will cut stuff down before it's early, or if we leave it on crop rotation, this is the automated form of farming. It takes a lot less micromanagement, but it takes a lot more setup. Now, doing it manually, you will get more crop yield for the amount of effort that you put in. So it's generally recommended in the early game to do it manually. And then as you transition to having either a massive town that you have a lot of things to manage, or if you have multiple towns across the map, you're going to want to automate that and take the hit to efficiency. So to start manual farming, you need at least one farmhouse, at least one field, and a single worker or more. Obviously, the more workers you throw in, the faster it'll go. And in this case, let's say we need to get some wheat so we can turn that into bread. So I'm going to switch this on, and our workers will start to exit their farmhouse to come plow. There's 4 different stages here. We need to plow the field first, then seed it, then it'll grow, and then it'll be harvested. Now, again, when we are manually farming, we are going to control when all of these happen ourselves, because if we leave it to the AI, it's very inefficient. They will plant stuff right before wintertime and they'll end up dying, or they'll harvest it when the crops are only 20 or 30% done growing, which means we're going to do it all the same amount of work to get a third of the yield. So that's obviously not ideal. As these guys are plowing, some people will come behind to sow. Obviously, the more workers you have, the better off it is. And there's also some upgrades you can get. If you come here, you can grab the heavy plow with a single perk investment, and you get it right from the start of the game if you really want. You have to upgrade your farmhouse. There's a little button right here you click, and as soon as you do the upgrade, it'll give you the option to permanently assign a livestock. So if we do that, an ox will help our people plow the fields a little faster, and I'll show you right now what that looks like. But just so you're aware, you want to have as many farmhouses as you can based on how many workers you have going. And each of those farmhouses at the peak efficiency, every single farmhouse will have its own ox assigned to it. So in this case, we have 2 farmhouses. We're going to want to have at least 2 oxen assigned to it. And then generally we would probably back this off and build quite a few more farmhouses, hire more oxen, and then do a lot better work. In this case, I'm just trying to demonstrate how it works. But one rule of thumb you need to stand by. For every farmhouse with an ox that you have, in this case we have 2, you need to have at least as many fields working as you have oxen, and then add 1 more field. So in this case we have 2 farmhouses. We need to have at least 2 fields plus 1, so 3 fields in total. So for 3 farmhouses with oxen, you need 3 fields. Let's go ahead and turn this one on, and then we'll turn on one of these in the back. You can have as many fields beyond that as you want, but make sure you have at least 1 more field than you have oxen working. And the reason that is, these ox are going to plow the field incredibly fast. But if you have a lot of workers and you have all the oxen hogging up all the fields, other workers cannot get on here when the ox is on because I guess it's dangerous. And so they will not help plow. They will not seed the field. They won't do anything. So if you have 1 more field than you have ox, you can see right here, they're coming over here. All the people that have nothing to do, instead of just sitting around, they're still helping out. They're going to plow this by hand. They're going to seed it. And as soon as these other fields are done plowing, they will switch over to sowing the field as well. And then you'll get the whole thing done very quickly. If we have as many fields as we have oxen, it's incredibly inefficient because you have a lot of workers sitting around in town and doing absolutely nothing. The best thing you can do is have your workers in the area as soon as the fields are ready to be sown. So by having them, even if you don't care how efficient that field is being plowed, it's more about having them in the area so they can sow quickly as soon as the oxen are done. You can see this one is starting to be sown, so they'll run over there and grab that. Now this field is fully plowed and sowed, and we're just waiting for crop growth. You can see right now it's August. We've got 1 month of summer left, and we've got 3 months of autumn. That's only 4 months of growth. These things need about 8 to 9 months to grow to full. So this isn't going to give you a full harvest if we were to harvest in September like the game would like us to do. So what we're going to do in this case, we'll wait for all these other fields to get harvested, and then we're going to have to micromanage these workers to make sure they do not cut stuff early that we don't want them to cut. As soon as all your fields are 100%, you should pause the game. Go back to your farmhouse, take everybody off. You don't want anybody doing anything that they shouldn't be doing. So as of right now, our fields, this one's only 11%. It's not ready to harvest. This one just got planted at 3%, 6%. So obviously it needs more time. If we leave workers in there and any of these fields are above 15%, they will automatically harvest it and you're going to get a tiny fraction. You can see right now, if we were to harvest in harvesting season, this field would generate 0, this would generate 0, this would generate 2, and this would generate 0. So again, we are manually farming. We're going to have to work against what the AI wants us to do, which means we need to take everybody off the farm. Normally, if we had just these 4 fields, we would leave them off for the month of September. They would start to grow through the wintertime, and we just need to keep an eye on them. We are ready to harvest. These are at 100%. However, it's not harvesting season yet, right? We still have 1 month to go. But again, every month that you don't have your people working is 1 month that you're losing efficiency. Not only are your workers not turning these crops into actual usable goods, but you are using fertility from this land. Even if you're at 100%, every month that you have something selected here that's not fallow, it drains the fertility rating. So you'll notice when you automate a lot of your farms, like for example, these fields are at 100%. They've been at 100% for at least a full month, if not 2. That means the fertility was actually drained for the last 2 months, even though no extra yield was obtained by these crops. When you hold tab, it'll show you how many crops should be yielded by the harvesting season. So you can see this one's 66 out of 66. This one's short by 2. Probably don't need to wait for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our workers back in. We need to go ahead and tell them to force early harvest. Again, if you don't force early harvest, they will do it automatically in September. We want to tell them what to do, when to do it, because we know better than the AI does. We're going to force early harvest on both of these. And also, let's say flax is usually not as important. Let's say our people were starving and we need to make sure this field gets done first. We can increase the field priority to make sure it takes precedent over the flax field. So let's do that. And you'll see our people are going to come down here, start picking everything. Once their own personal inventory fills up, they will deposit that in the middle of the field. You can see it start to fill up. So if you have a really big field, it can be a chore for them to grab something from here and bring it all the way back here to the middle to store. That also brings up a point about the shape of your plot. If I make a plot that is long and skinny like this, and your people are trying to harvest this, what'll end up happening is they'll work their way out, they'll grab some crops, and just like they do in here, they have to go back to the middle to drop them off. And then they continue to harvest. If they're at the edge and they're having to go all the way, let's say they get to right here and there's still crops right here to harvest, they will grab those, go all the way back to the middle, drop them off, come all the way to the back, and continue. That is a very inefficient way to harvest crops. So I do not recommend having really long, slender fields. There was some prevailing thought that having fields like this were better for the oxen when it comes to plowing. And there is some truth to that. It is slightly faster if you have it elongated. But the problem is you slow down your harvest by a massive amount. So do not do that. It's okay if you have long, skinny fields like this, if they're not too long. For example, this one, to walk from here to here is not a very big distance. But like I showed you before, if they're having to walk half of the region just to drop stuff off and then have to walk half of the region to go back and harvest the rest, that's bad. Generally, if you're doing really big field, you want to have it somewhat square, whatever shape that keeps it nice and compact. So at any given point, they don't have to walk all that far to drop the crops off to the middle. Now, because we have oxen helping, they will actually pick up 20 or 30 crops and then bring it back to the farmhouse. They're very efficient at moving a lot of crops quickly, and I recommend using them. Now, something interesting happened here. We are in September. This is the prime harvesting season that the AI wants to cut everything down. So that means we need to watch very closely if we're harvesting in September, but we also have fields that we don't want to have harvested, even though it's in September. We need to make sure that nobody touches these fields. That means whatever fields need to be harvested, increase the field priority above whatever these other ones are. So these are all set on medium. We just need to set this one to highest priority. They will harvest this. And then again, if this is at 15% or higher, which it will be most likely in the next minute or so, they will start to pull stuff from here. So what we're going to need to do is we'll let them harvest. And again, you can see having a long skinny field is kind of a drag because they have to go, as they're getting to the edge, they have to walk all the way back. So be careful with that. Usually square shapes are a little better for the harvesting season. There you go. So they're done harvesting. This one's fully harvested. Now what we need to do is we want to make sure that they don't replant on this, or we don't want them to replant the same thing. If we leave it on flax right now, they will plow the field and then they will seed it with flax, which is obviously a big mistake because we only have 10% fertility, which is not ideal. You want to make sure you don't plant on anything that has less than 30% fertility unless you absolutely have to. There are some instances where you have a region that does not have fertile soil. For example, this region down here, we have a tiny little sliver, it looks like a bladder or something of barley that's decent. It's the +1 fertility. That generally means you're going to get barley in the 24 to 30% range fertility. Those are okay. If you have to do it, it's fine. Do it. absolutely do not plant anything that's in any minus region. -1, -2, -3, stay away from those for planting. It's a complete waste of your time. You will get like maybe 4 or 5 for an entire year. So always make sure you harvest in at least the +1 regions and make sure that your fertility is as close to 30 as possible. And I would say the very bare minimum I would go is like 25. I would not go below 25, but ideally you want to stay at 30 if you can. So back to this. Obviously, we don't want to plant flax again because that would be a huge mistake. So we'll set this to fallow. Always make sure you turn off force early harvest, because what happens is if you plant, let's say we plant wheat here and we accidentally forget to turn early harvest on and we have workers in there, as soon as this reaches 15% growth, they're going to automatically cut this down. You're basically doing what the AI does to you, but you're doing it to yourself. So turn off early harvest. Put it on fallow if you're not planning on planting again. Same thing here, fallow, turn off early harvest. If this thing reaches 15% and we're still in September, they're going to rush over there and start cutting it down. So what we want to do is we want to pull everybody off of the farms and then wait until the next month. We would wait until October and then we would put people back in and start planting the next crop. In this case, they're too busy picking up all the stuff from the field, and you can see the fields have their own storage right down here. You can see if there's anything on it that needs to be picked up. This one's clear. This one still has 35 barley, so we'll watch it. And just keep an eye, make sure nobody sneaks up here to start harvesting your field that you have. It still needs to grow. So you can see right here, there's 2, 1, and the barley is completely gone. So now that everything is gone off the field, what we want to do is remove all the workers, get them all out of there. And then that'll ensure that none of your other fields get harvested in September. Again, if you're doing this not in September, let's say this was in June, you just leave your workers in and start planting the next field. We would want to go to wheat on this one. We'd probably want to go to flax on this one. We have even more time. We can just start planting all the stuff that we need for the next year. Now, one thing you'll notice, there is some strange phenomenon. You'll notice we don't have anybody in our farmhouse right now working. They're all empty. But you'll notice people are still running the oxen because the oxen is actually controlled by the hitching post. So as long as you have somebody idle, they will continue to throw the oxen on the fields, even if you have nobody in there. So you can still plow all the fields without risking harvesting anything because you don't need anybody in the farmhouse to do it. So just be aware, if you have that upgrade, it's very safe to do it. Just leave it on there and people will start throwing the oxen around the fields and you won't have to worry about your people coming in and grabbing stuff off the fields. Now the new month just rolled over, so we are no longer in danger of early harvesting anything by putting people in. As long as it's not September, make sure you have people in there if you have things to do. So example, we're going to throw everybody back in the farm and they're going to continue to plow all these other fields. So here's the big takeaways. When you're doing manual farming, your job is to make sure that you place workers and pull them off at the right times. Primarily, you want to make sure nobody's working in September if you have crops that are not ready to harvest, but they're above 15%. You want to make sure you pull workers off if you have no fields ready to do anything and they're all in the growth phase, or if they're in fallow and recovering. Make sure as soon as something is harvested, you click it back to fallow or whatever the next one is ready to go, and then make sure you turn off forced early harvest. And then in general, what you're trying to do throughout the year is keep an eye on how your crops are doing. You want to make sure you watch them, and as soon as they get up close to their high yield, you want to force early harvest so that you can get the next group in there, or you can get it back to fallow so it can recover quicker. Your farming cycle is faster by doing it manually because the AI lets it sit at 100% for 1 to 2 months. So by doing it manually, you can cut that harvesting time by 2 months, which means your cycle is a lot faster. So you can get these fields harvested into fallow and harvested again faster than the automated ones. Not only that, you have more control over how often these things get harvested. So in general, if you're doing manual farming, you can generally farm 2 to 3 times more crops than if you automate it because we can control a lot of things and make it more efficient. Now let's talk about automated farming, also known as crop rotation. When you open up your field, if you click on the crop rotation, it'll open up 3 different years that you can select a crop type. And every year in October, all of these will move down by 1 and the bottom one will move up to the top. So for example, this year wheat will be grown once it's harvested. In October, the new one's planted. Barley will move to the top and wheat will move to the bottom. And then the second year will be fallow. If you want to set these up to automate, you generally don't want to do only one field because then they'll have something to do only that 1 year, and the second year, and then the third year, they'll have absolutely nothing to do and it'll be a complete waste of time. If you set up 3 smaller fields instead of 1 big field, then you can get 2 crops each year, and then the third will be fallow, so they'll actually work 2/3 of this setup right here. So the first year, they will be working wheat, the middle will recover, the one on the right will be barley. The second year will be barley, wheat, and then fallow, and then again the final fallow, barley, wheat. So every year you're getting some shipment of wheat and some shipment of barley. Now let's say you need only 1 type of crop and not 2. You can actually set up larger fields. So you notice these are about double the size of these. because they're going to be working only the one field at a time, and then the other two will be fallow, but you'll be getting more of the one type of wheat. So in this case, we're getting wheat the first year, second and third year, with all the others being fallow. So those are the two types of automated farming. Either you're going to get two types of crops for one set of fields, or you can get one type but larger fields. I've set up a large demonstration here to show you what the optimal way to do it is. And I have 8 farmhouses all around the outsides. And the reason you want to have your farm fields on the outside is because they'll have a place to drop them off quickly. If you have all your farm fields far away, they're going to be traveling a lot. And again, these are set up in sets of 5. So this bottom set is 5, and it's going to rotate through barley and wheat. And then the third year would be fallow. Again, this middle one is the same thing. It's going to be wheat and barley. And then this year is this turn to be fallow up at the top. So essentially what I did is I calculated how many Morgans one farmer could get through in 1 year by themselves. And then I multiplied it by 8. It comes to about 0.65 Morgan per farmer. So if you add all this up, this is 5 Morgans of land for 8 families. It roughly comes to about 0.6, 0.65, somewhere around there. So they can handle this no problem. Now, as I mentioned in the previous section, they will not actually do any harvesting except for during September. So this is one of the biggest drawbacks to using the automated farming. But as you'll notice, I don't have to click anything. Everything's automated. If we just let this run for 10 or 15 or 20 years, you'll have pretty much precise results every single year. So you see they start to come out, pull the crops, and then once one field is done, they'll start to pull those crops back to one of the farmhouses. And once the whole thing is done, they'll start to plow and sow for the next season. So September, they do all the harvesting. October, November, they will begin to plow and sow. Although if they don't finish everything, they will actually go back during the spring in March, April, or May to continue to sow and plow then as well. And we're cutting a little close with September ending. They should be able to finish this up in time, but you'll notice they start to plow the field already before the next month is even up. The problem happens when they start to sow this field as well, because once it rotates, as soon as October hits, you'll notice everything will disappear that you currently have. There it goes. So October hit, everything gets wiped. So any work that is done in September when you're doing automated farming will get completely wiped out, because what happens is the computer system changes from what it was before. It was at wheat before. Wheat got moved down, and then fallow got replaced, and it just it basically burns the field and then resets it to whatever the new one is, whether it's fallow, barley, etc. So now we have 2 months to plow and sow before the winter comes, and then once the winter comes, then they'll be sitting around doing absolutely nothing. Now, I did mention this in the previous section as well. The biggest bottleneck for using the automated farming system is the harvesting season. You literally get a single month to do all the work that you just put in for the entire year before. And if you don't get everything done in that 1 month, you're basically hosed. If you look, we will probably complete the plowing and sowing really fast, probably within the first month, and then the next month they'll just have nothing to do. Again, if we try to utilize that extra time by planting more fields, we will be able to plant and sow the fields, but the problem is they won't be able to harvest them in time. And then those fields are going to get wiped out when September comes around, and it gets wiped out. This has been one of the biggest issues, and the reason why I haven't posted this video soon enough. I spent about 50 hours trying to figure out a way around this. And I have some workarounds, but they don't typically work in all scenarios, so we'll be going that in just a second. But let's wait until these are fully seeded. And if you hold tab, you can see anything that is not 0 out of 0 is going to be fully seeded. There we go. Everything's fully seeded. They have nothing else to do. And like I said, we could technically farm more, but the problem is they just have nothing else to do. Now, this setup is pretty much perfect. Once in a while, you'll see them miss maybe half of a field, but for the most part, this is like clockwork. You'll be able to get a good harvest from this. But the problem is, if you look at your actual fertility, it doesn't follow this pattern whatsoever. It's okay for wheat. It's terrible for everything else. So you get a little bit of barley in the middle, and the bottom's not good. So this generally doesn't work in a real life setting. So generally what you'll do is you'll follow around the stuff that you're trying to find. Like, for example, if you want to get flax, you need to have a little farm over here. There's a little bit of flax here as well. This is where the biggest issue that I ran into is, and I'm going to show you exactly what ends up happening. So I reloaded back to where right before we're about to harvest. So we're at the end of August. September's about to roll around. You'll see people come out and start to work the fields closest to them. So again, same setup. Everybody has one farmhouse. Some of them have an ox, some of them don't, but they have fields right next to them that they should be farming. And they also have limited work area set up. So like this guy is only set to work here. I've got another farming setup over here. Same thing, limited work area is set to here, and this one is set to here. So there's 2 sets of farms over here, 1 farm here, and then the group of 8. September rolls around, they're starting to pull the crops, which is exactly what they're supposed to do. But let's take a look over here and see what they're doing. Now you can see there's two people here that are actually doing what they're supposed to do, but if we click on the people tab, you can see a totally different story. I'm going to do both of these at the same time, and then you can scream at your screen while they do idiotic things. So these people are walking all the way across the map to do it. Now you might think, well, maybe they were over there and they just happened to be in that area and they go to the nearest one. But that wouldn't make sense either though, because this person was over here and now he's going over there. He's fetching water. As soon as they're done, they're going to start doing stuff over here. It's almost impossible to get people to stay in their area. And what they end up doing is they walk across the map. They'll collect, like this person probably grabbed one piece of barley, and then they're going to walk all the way back here. By the time they're back here, the whole harvesting season's done. So they pretty much ignore their limited workspace and they just do whatever the hell they want. So if you want to have an automated farming system, if it's all centrally located, you can do it. It's much less efficient than doing it manually, but it's possible. However, if you have farms all over the place, you'll notice right here, 1 out of the 3 got harvested. The other 2 are completely untouched for now. They'll probably get a little bit of work done. We'll watch as soon as October hits. These are going to get completely wiped out and we'll have lost all that work and efficiency. And then this one actually did get harvested on time. This is the one that struggles. So it seems like the closer you are to the central farming location that you have, where you have most of your farms, the more accurate they are. Anything outside of that, they will start to wander and it'll be really difficult to get them to focus on just one area. So they did half of this side. So that's 1.5. They still have 1.5 to go. And if they don't get it, it's pretty much going to be gone. And there you can see it. It just rolled over. The crops are still there, but it's actually a different type of crop now, so you can't actually get it. So that this entire field was wasted, and more than half of this field was wasted. So you could see the efficiency loss is significant. Not only is it worse than if you did it manually like we did earlier, but even doing automated at the best size fields that you can get just does not work the way it's supposed to. Even if you set, and like I said before, I've spent 50 hours trying to do a combination of field priority, setting limited work areas, putting all your farmers in one location and having them go out to the fields. It doesn't matter. If you put all, for example, let's say, if you could see here, I probably have 20 or 30 farmhouses here because I tried all types of setups. I have about 10 farmhouses right here plus the 8. I set everybody up right here, and what ends up happening is they will run to the closest field, and as soon as that one field is done, they will not harvest anything else. They will take the crops off of the field and take it to the farmhouse that they belong to, and then they'll run back. So if you get all of your people, let's say you have 10 or 15 families, they will work on like 4 or 5 fields at once, take those crops back, and then go out and do another one. By the time they finish this area, there's no time for them to make it all the way back here. And I tried to limit their work area. They ignore it and they just keep working wherever they want. So again, automated is fine. Just be aware that it has its limitations. And I'm not saying this just to complain. I'm saying this so that you don't make plans for setting up a big town with a big farming operation that's going to be automated, only to find out that you're going to get screwed because you can't actually harvest anything that way. And then for the final example, this is a bit more of a realistic setup that you would want to do in your own campaign, as opposed to having these massive square fields surrounded. This is more of an organic setup, and this is in an area that has very poor soil fertility, and I just wanted to get barley for the most part. So there's a little bit of wheat and a little bit of barley, but it's all set up around the barley specifically. And you can see there's a couple other spots of barley nearby that I would probably clear out and do it. But in the very beginning, when you have a small town, for example, this has only 23 families here, you can see this setup is perfect. So each one of these is 0.3. So 0.3 plus 0.3 is 0.6. And each one of these farmhouses has 3 of them, 1 for fallow and 2 at 0.3 Morgan each to do whatever crop they're doing for that year. So again, this house is responsible for these 3. This house is responsible for the next 3. This one's responsible for the next 3. And this one for the last 3. There's actually an extra little thumbnail here that ends up getting harvested. So the 0.6 is not an exact, it's actually 0.65. But you can't tell if you're half Morgan. You can't tell the 0.05. So generally, once you get a couple of these things, you can throw up a few extra little thumbnails on the end that aren't claimed by anybody. And once they're done working, they will go through and clear that out. You'll get a little tiny bit of boost to efficiency there. Let's let this roll so we can see them actually harvest it. And then the other thing I was going to tell you, when you're automating it, do not use plowing stations. Because like I said, the bottleneck is the harvest season. It's not the plowing and the sowing. You get 2 months to plow and sow, and you get only 1 month to harvest. You can plow and sow as much as you want, but if you can only harvest enough without having the plow, then you might as well just skip the plow entirely if you're doing the automated setup. So let's see how these guys handle it. And one thing you'll notice, they do tend to move back and forth between fields. And this is the biggest issue with having fields that are not all in one central location. They will start to meander back and forth between different fields. And you'll have an issue where they spend more than half of the harvesting season just walking around. It's absolutely infuriating. And mind you, I have tried this with limited work area, so they only stick to the area that they're supposed to nearby, and they just ignore it. So they just finished up the last piece, and I said everybody has 3. Everybody's done their 3. There's this little thumbnail that's extra. They have a few days to handle this, but it's 4 on 1. You can see they didn't quite get the whole thing, but they got 5 wheat out of it. So it's not an exact science, but it's pretty close. If you can get 0.3, if you need 2 fields, 0.3 each, and then another 0.3 to be fallow, or if you're doing all of one crop, have 0.6, and then 3 of those, and then you'll be able to do just one crop rotating through. Now, before we get into the databases, I wanted to show you a real-life example of how I optimize my farms in a campaign that I've recently been testing out. Here are the settings for that campaign. You start with winter with nothing. You get rated from the first year, and you get rated often. The AI is aggressive. Residential requirements are demanding and a high penalty. It is tough as nails. But the first thing that I do when I'm setting up my town, I will immediately go to the barley screen. Emmer and flax are never going to be your bottlenecks. It'll always be barley. So go straight to the barley screen, and you can see right here, we start in this little vein of yellow and then flanked on either side by green. We want to keep as much of our farmland as close to our people as possible so that they don't do that roaming thing that I showed you. Also, one thing to keep in mind, this has rich soil. If this was not rich soil, we would have to do the exact same thing, but we would want to do it around these little yellow veins. Your options are going to be a lot more limited, so that's why this is a good example to show. But before you put any buildings down, make sure you map out what you want to keep so that you don't accidentally build through it or around it and then screw yourself over in the future. So I'm just going to create some shapes around these. They don't have to be exact or accurate. They just have to be a rough idea because you're going to eventually delete these and put your actual farms down. But at least these are a good indicator of where your crops are that you want to keep. Now you can do this for all the other ones. Again, if you're in a piece of land that does not have rich soil, then you're definitely going to want to do this because your options are so much more limited. If you're in a fertile area, it's not nearly as big of a deal because you're going to have a lot more to work with. So this is probably more than I would ever use, but map it out because it's free. These fields don't cost you anything and they're instant. And then let's fast forward to the end of the campaign where I finished it, and I'll show you what I ended up with. And again, you'll notice there's no trade posts. All the money was generated from the population. So that means the farming had to be absolutely on point. Otherwise, people would get pissed off by not having beer or clothing or food, and they would leave. And you could have your entire town can collapse within a matter of a couple months if you don't do it right. So like I said, this is as optimized as I was able to get it. And you can see here, the shape of the barley is roughly what I had before. There's a little bit extra here for the flax. And then you can see the same things I talked about with the manual farming. I planted things earlier in the year, like in summer last year. It grew all the way through the winter, and now it's March, which is perfect because most of these are already done. They're ready to harvest. So I'm going to go through and do force early harvest on all the ones that I want to get rid of. And then once that's all done, then I will start to plant next year's crops. So these ones, I just look and make sure that you have at least 40%, 30 to 40%. Obviously in the rich soil, you have a little bit more leeway. In the other soil, you gotta deal with what you got. But here I let everything get up to at least 40% before I used it again. And by doing that, I was able to support a town of 100 families and have enough ale to make sure that we never ran out. And then you can see this challenge is definitely possible. It's pretty challenging, and I only had the 5 militia and 1 retinue to do it, but we got there in the end. Before we get into the databases, I wanted to bring up an important topic that doesn't get talked about: rounding error. Both databases I'm going to share with you had dozens of hours of testing and verification, but still wound up with some inaccuracies because I didn't catch the rounding error until late. However, it's important to be upfront and honest with the integrity of the data. And since I had already spent over 50 hours on this video, I wasn't willing to go back and redo all of the testing over. But there are still some useful takeaways, so let's check it out. This is the farming speed database where I tested several different setups to see which would yield the fastest time to plow and sow crops. It's interesting to note that some setups had a faster plowing speed, but a slower plowing and sowing speed. This means the plow goes smoothly, but struggles to keep up during the seeding phase. In general, the smaller fields can be plowed incredibly fast, but suffer from the AI pausing between jobs, which adds a lot of inefficiency to their overall time. I also tested to see if the shape of the plot made a big difference in overall speed. It turns out long skinny plots don't actually increase the speed to plow and sow. However, as I mentioned earlier, long skinny plots are terrible for harvesting since they travel to the center of the plot to drop off crops and continue to harvest after. Squares are much more efficient for the overall plow, sow, and harvest process. And the final point, splitting huge plots into smaller plots is generally unnecessary. All of these harvesting times are close enough to be statistically identical, so keep them to a reasonable size and make sure you follow the rule. Have more plots than you have oxen working. The next database is much more useful as it contains the yield data for different plot sizes and fertility percentages. Again, we're not going to go line by line, so let's look at the important takeaways. I've narrowed the field to only looking at wheat of a 1 Morgan plot size and sorted it with the higher fertility from the top down. I was shocked to learn that fertility has little to no effect on the final yield of a plot. One starting with 62 fertility produced nearly the same as a plot with 38 fertility. In fact, the highest yield from this dataset was a 39% fertility plot, although we can't put much weight into that given the rounding error we discussed earlier. Roughly 2% fertility is used each month and converted into crops. So provided a plot has enough fertility to avoid hitting 0% before reaching 100% growth, it will produce the same as the highest possible fertility plot. Where high fertility comes in handy though is how often you can use it. If we start a field at 60% and still has above 30% at the end of the first year, we can use it again, or twice in a row. Fertility is regenerated roughly 4% per month. So in theory, good soil could be used for 2 years on wheat and then 1 year on fallow. Looking at the data for other crop types, they seem to follow the same pattern and will yield approximately the same as the wheat, or 60 to 70 per Morgan. And finally, I created a couple columns on the end to be able to put this data to use easily. The annual factor tells us how many people need to be satisfied per year based on the crop type. For example, 1 food is consumed per family per month, or 12 per year. Wheat eventually converts into 2 bread, so instead of needing 12 wheat to feed 1 family per year, we only need 6 wheat per family. Flax is easy since clothing is used once per year, so no conversion needed there. And barley turns into ale, and each family will consume roughly 0.65 ale per month, or just shy of 8 for the year. I then divided the yield for a 1 Morgan plot by this factor to determine how many families would be satisfied for the type of good for the whole year. 1 Morgan of wheat will feed approximately 11 families per year, assuming they are only eating bread. If you have other types of food, then it's actually much less. If they're eating 4 types of food, then you will only need 1/4 of that amount for the bread, and you will feed 4 times as many families with the same 1 Morgan plot, or 44 families in total. 1 Morgan of flax will clothe 70 families for the year, and the dreaded barley. 1 Morgan of barley will satisfy 9.5 families for the year. If you have a town with 100 families, then simply divide your family count by this number and you'll have how many Morgans you need to plant. 100 families eating 4 types of food will only need 2.27 Morgan of wheat per year, 1.43 Morgan of flax, and 10.5 Morgan of barley. Now you probably can see why your town never has enough ale to go around. I wanted to share one more point about how fertility is calculated on the map. This is very clearly inside the green for wheat, and it's got 46%. The farther away we go from the center, you'll notice that wheat actually goes down, 42%. Even though it's still in the same area, not all areas are created equal. This one is 46, this one is 42 because it's further away from the center. On the back end, my guess is there's a curve that shows what the fertility is supposed to be, and it goes towards the center point. So whatever the center point is to this, the closer you are to the center point, the higher fertility you are. The further out you go, the lower the fertility is. So even within the same big plot of land, even though it's all in the same plus, the 2 plus signs, you're going to get a different fertility amount. So if you're making smaller field sizes, make them as close to the center as possible to get the most amount of fertility. And then you can see right here, right on the edge, you're kind of halfway in the green and halfway in the yellow. This one's 34%. That's a massive drop from this, and it's only a couple feet away. And then as you go into here, you can see just straight yellow, it's only 35%. And if we go into the really bad area, it goes all the way down to 11%. So you would probably get maybe 3 or 4 per Morgan on this. It's just a complete waste of time. Just one word of caution. This is the early access build, and it's pretty clear parts of the farming are either not functioning properly or are very poorly implemented. As soon as these get changed, I'll be running tests to find the optimal automated build, and I'll share the info with you as soon as possible. I'm curious to hear what surprised you the most from this video. Let me know in the comments. If there are certain parts of farming that are still not clear, let me know and I could make a follow-up video on this. A huge shout out to the Patreon supporters and YouTube members who help fund my addiction to databases. I appreciate you.